Scranbag, 1969. A miscellany of events in and around the Royal Navy, introduced by Lieutenant Richard Baker, RNR.
767 Squadron, the first Royal Naval Phantom Training Unit, was commissioned at Yeovilton in January. The CO is Lieutenant Commander Peter Marshall. He's got the job of training a large family of pilots and observers and won't have much time at home with his wife and 8 children. And in the spring, another commissioning of Phantom Squadron 892, which in 1970 will embark in HMS Ark Royal. After the commissioning, the Phantoms, accompanied by Sea Vixens, marked the approaching end of an era with a fly-past. And it wasn't long before the first Sea Lord and Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sir Michael Leffernew, got the feel of the Phantom. Watched by Captain Cunningham and piloted by Commander Anthony Pearson, he flew from Yeovilton at dawn to Allied Forces Southern Europe, Naples, to confer with Commander-in-Chief South, Admiral Horatio Rivero. If you take a day return by Phantom, the world is indeed a small place these days. Admiral Leffernew touched down again the same afternoon at Yeovilton. After discarding the informality of his flying suit, it was back to his desk in Whitehall before dusk. HMS Eagle, and a greeting from Captain J.D. Treacher for Admiral Leffernew when he arrived by chopper for the recommissioning of the carrier Devonport. Originally named Audacious but renamed Eagle in January 1946, the carrier is now in her 6th commission. The flight deck was invaded by a rare gathering of 9 admirals, no less than 4 of whom had once been commanding officers of the ship. This is the day of the Minnie, and for compact little ships like Flinsham and Dittisham of the Ganges Training Squadron, a trip up the Rhine, avoiding, of course, the temptation to the Lorelei. The 2 ships visited many towns along the river, and a high spot for the young cadets was the ascent of Mount Pilatus by cable car. Something indeed to write home about. Another friendly invasion and star treatment for the men of HMS Albion when the ship paid a goodwill visit to Kobe, Japan in the spring. Smooth, very smooth. And the smooth, easygoing manners of Jack were well in evidence when ladies of the Orient visited the ship. In fact, the traditional courtesies of both East and West matched up very nicely. But even in Japan, the blossoms of spring last but a little while, and Albion put to sea for less romantic duties. Sunday, May the 4th, and a dramatic touchdown at Wisley, Surrey, during the Daily Mail air race, when Lieutenant Commander Borroman brought the Navy Phantom in from New York in just 5 hours, 3 minutes, 18.8 seconds. On touchdown, 2 tires burst, and the plane had to be skillfully steered to a standstill. A Wessex helicopter was already airborne, following up the jet and saving precious seconds in picking up the observer, Lieutenant Paul Waterhouse, the moment he sprinted from the disabled Phantom. Only when the tires stopped smouldering and Lieutenant Commander Borroman emerged from the cockpit did his wife Anne uncross her fingers and toes. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Dines put the helicopter down on an open site near the post office tower. Lieutenant Waterhouse, watched by thousands, jumped to the ground and dashed along crowded streets to the tower, but the joint efforts of Borroman and Waterhouse didn't quite match up to the world record time set up a week later by their rivals in the west to east crossing, Lieutenant Commander Goddard and the squadron CO, Lieutenant Commander Brian Davis, who covered the distance in 4 hours, 46 minutes, 57 seconds. On the hillside slopes overlooking the Forth River, HMS Cochrane at Rosyth now occupies 24 acres. The new shore-based establishment replaces the accommodation ships Duncansby Head and Girdle Ness. Facilities include the latest equipment to make the chores of life ashore more comfortable. And the modern accommodation for crews of ships in for refitting can take 50 officers, 190 chief petty officers, and 820 junior ratings. And even painful necessities almost become a pleasure. The visit of Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra was certainly a pleasurable occasion. The Princess chatted with the men and watched a march past. The Royal Navy can be found in exotic places these days. A victory in the snow for the Navy team at St. Moritz and a slippery start on the Cresta Run at the Inter-Services Winter Sports. Eyes down for a sober beginning to the hair-raising trip of 1,300 yards on the Cresta course. Gradients of 1 in 8, over a 400-foot drop, speeds around 80 miles an hour. From behind the camera, it's hard to appreciate the speed or the danger. Skeletons is the official name given to the toboggans, and it may be all too apt at times, though happily not on this occasion. Hey, no shortcuts over the top. It was all-out victory for the men of the Royal Navy and the Marines. Lieutenant Commanders Wright and Wilkes, Captain Cavan of the Marines, Lieutenant Commander Allen, Commander Idians, and Lieutenant Parker. Not only the winners, they also achieved a record time for the best 4 riders from the 6-man team ever to be achieved. Below zero in St. Moritz, but a steaming occasion in Bournemouth at the Hotel and Catering Exhibition. Against hot competition from hotels, training colleges and schools, as well as the other 2 services, chefs of the Navy triumphed in one of Britain's top culinary competitions. Without stirring things up, the Wrens had a real opportunity to mix it with the men and compete as a team for top awards. This was the first time the Wrens had entered as a team, and it proved a worthwhile venture. The judges, with delicate palate and due deliberation, announced their verdicts. For the Navy, 7 gold, 10 silver, and 11 bronze medals. Chief Petty Officer Ticehurst from HMS Fife won 2 gold medals for the 2nd time running. The title of Chef de Cuisine went to Petty Officer Wren Marilyn Hill, who also won 2 gold medals. And with teammates leading Wren Chilton and leading Wren Hall, prepared and cooked a 4-course meal in 45 minutes. An urgent call to re-establish tranquility in the Caribbean when a detachment of Royal Marines landed on the beaches of Anguilla from HMS Minerva, without spoiling everyone's fun. A detachment of helmeted sailors from the Minerva patrolled the beaches with automatic weapons. In less than 2 hours, all military objectives had been achieved without a shot being fired, and Wasp helicopters from the ships were able to land stores and supplies to the versatile, flexible men on the ground. Borne on the shoulders of his supporters and clutching the Bible, the island's Prime Minister, Mr. Webster, attracted much attention from a confused population, many of whom were wondering what the fuss was about. There was a possibility of violence when Mr. Tony Lee, the Commissioner of Her Majesty's government, arrived, and the Navy provided him with a bodyguard until the tension eased off. A cue for the naval landing party and the Marines to enjoy a few hours' relaxation in the sun-drenched Leeward Island. Another tropical mission, the attempt by Prime Minister Harold Wilson to break the deadlock in the Nigeria-Biafra conflict when he flew to Lagos in March. Captain Kerr and the officers of Fearless renewed an earlier acquaintance made when Fearless was the scene for the Prime Minister's parley with Mr. Smith of Rhodesia. As usual, the ship's company contributed to the convivial atmosphere when they entertained members of the federal government on board Fearless before the PM met Nigerian leaders to try and get the 2 sides together for peace talks. The PM, always willing to spend his little free time with the lads below decks, enjoyed a pipe, a pint, and a chat in the exclusive atmosphere of the monastery. The vocal group serenaded the PM, which, let's hope, proved some consolation when the attempt at mediation failed. Down the Thames for the First Sea Lord and the Swedish ambassador, when they were invited to lunch by Vice Admiral Lindemalm, Chief of the Naval Staff in the Swedish Navy, on board RSN Elsnappen, a submarine support ship and minesweeper. Guest and host returned to Charing Cross Pier by hovercraft, The HM2 was on trial for the Ministry of Technology to test the world's first sidewall hovercraft as a commuter bus. The first Sea Lord was in characteristic form, always ready for a word with the young men who will shape the Navy of tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. The British Transarctic expedition returned to Portsmouth in June in HMS Endurance, after the ship's helicopters had lifted the team off the North Polar ice at the end of their historic 3,800-mile journey across the Cap. The BBC were there. They provided us with this report by Glyn Owen.
It was on June the 11th that the expedition got close enough to the ship for the helicopters to lift them off the ice. They all looked quite extraordinarily different from when we'd left them 16 months earlier at Point Barrow in Alaska. Much thinner, more haggard, but weather-beaten and very, very fit. I asked Wally Herbert how he felt and whether he had any regrets about this last stage of their journey.
I think one of relief to start with, that knowing that that from, say, in a few hours' time, the responsibility is going to be the captain of the ships and no longer mine. It's going to be his responsibility to get me back instead of me being responsible for getting the others across here. Go back to the noise and the bustle of big city life after that sort of fairly tranquil existence living on the ice.
The final liftoff to the ship was very sudden, a flawlessly efficient operation. After 475 days, their journey was finished.
Neat work by the Navy to round off a major British achievement, and very neat and tidy were the Wrens, when Admiral of the Fleet Earl Mountbatten of Burma travelled to the Wren training establishment at Burfield near Reading and inspected divisions. 17-year-old Nicola Thompson from Barry, South Wales, had been in the service just 3 weeks when Earl Mountbatten paid his visit and made a detailed inspection of the future shape of the Wrens. During the afternoon, he gave them a short talk, which was obviously spiced with his inimitable humour and laced with lady appeal. The Admiral ended his visit with tea in the wardroom and an informal chat with the CO and officers of HMS Dauntless. A demonstration of the Wasp helicopter's new strike row. Equipped with the AS-12 wire-guided missile, which is under the control of the Observer, a Wasp from HMS Plymouth took off in July to show the effectiveness of the weapon to the press. Towed by the ship, the target reeled from the blow when the missile secured a bullseye. HMS Cleopatra off Singapore, a Wasp helicopter developed a fuel problem, and the fuel system had to be stripped. So the helicopter was lightened by removing the doors, the rear seat, the rotor blades and the tail cone. It was then lifted by a vertical replenishment Wessex Mark V helicopter over to HMS Hermes, which was nearby. The other bits and pieces followed in due course, and when the work was completed, the Wasp was able to return to Cleopatra in a more dignified manner, under its own steam. No need for running repairs at the Inter-Services Athletic Championships. As heralded by many and anticipated by the press, the new sensation had arrived. 23-year-old Royal Marine Jim Douglas completed the mile in 3 minutes 58.5 seconds. Already washed up, the Royal Navy's oldest aircraft carrier, HMS Victorious. Her final departure from Portsmouth was indeed a sad occasion. She was heading for Faslane to be broken up. It's nearly 30 years since she joined the Navy, and she certainly saw the world. A Royal Marine boat crew saw the entire British coast during the Daily Telegraph Round Britain powerboat race. During the trials off Poole, Dorset, the first Sea Lord, Sir Michael Lefanu, dropped in by helicopter to meet the crew and the owner of the boat, Mr. Jimmy Maybank, who had kindly allowed his powerboat K. Halem to be manned by the Marines, as they had no boat of their own. The Royal Marines crew was commanded by Major Stuart Syrad. The Royal Marines dropped in at the Infantry Training Centre Lympstone on a July afternoon as a starter for the Miss Meet the Marines beauty contest. Jimmy Saville, having just completed a programme of rigorous commando tests at the training centre, was making the most of a last cigar before being shot by a Royal Marines firing squad. The ladies were delighted to find him still very much alive and kicking, in readiness for the arduous task that followed. An awe-stricken Jimmy Savile, as Master of Ceremonies, had the enviable, nerve-shattering task of introducing the bevy of luscious beauty who entered in the hope of winning the title and a free holiday for two presented by the Gibraltar Tourist Office. Among the selection panel was another beauty, film actress Veronica Carlson. After much deliberation, the judging panel handed the verdict over to Jimmy, who handled the crowning ceremony with the usual Savile panache. The winner, 23-year-old Sonia Finlayson, a housewife and part-time model from Exeter. Only NCOs could be trusted to shoulder such a responsibility. And 2 days later at Arbroath in Scotland, another successful naval show. And, hey, come on, we've seen that one. Hot dogs were in great demand at the final air day ever to be held at HMS Condor. Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra had flown to Arbroath for the occasion, and occasion it was, especially for the children. Young pilots got their hands on the controls during a parade of flying hardware which covered over 30 years of mobility in the air. The RAF and the Fleet Air Arm put up Sea Vixens, Hunters, Victor Bombers, Jet Provosts, Buccaneers, Lightnings, Chipmunks, Gliders, Tiger Moths, and even Hurricanes and Spitfires. In their day, the dream of man actually landing on the moon seemed too far off to take as a serious probability. But in the summer of 1969, Apollo 11 left the certainty of routine existence for mankind on Earth to explore the unknown and make the first successful landing on the moon's surface. When the Apollo spacecraft left for outer space, sailors from Britain had a fine view of the launch from Cape Kennedy, because the achievement coincided with a visit to Port Canaveral of HMS Renown, Britain's third Polaris submarine. Renown's crew left terra firma and headed in the opposite direction, down below for the test firing of her Polaris missiles. The third completely successful excursion to Florida, this time for HMS Renown. On the other side of the world, at Aptly Cha, a small community opposite Aberdeen in Hong Kong colony, 2 officers and 15 ratings from HMS London camped out for a week while they constructed a much-needed 25-foot pier for the villagers who were unable to afford the cost. The commanding officer of HMS London, Captain Loseby, DSC, laid a commemorative plaque in the concrete. A great boost for British commerce and industry, and further ties of human friendship at Tokyo British Week. 4 military bands, a hovercraft and a sports team turned HMS Fearless and Stromness into floating exhibition centres. But Jack had ample opportunities to explore Tokyo City and discover its delights for himself. The RAF and men of the Duke of Wellington's regiment who were embarked in Fearless during her 2-week stay weren't in a hurry to leave at the end of the visit. All appreciated their midday tot, something the Navy won't be able to offer much longer. "200 years ago, a Lieutenant James Cook stepped ashore from HMS Endeavour onto the shores of New Zealand at Poverty Bay. To celebrate the bicentenary of that landing and to honour the memory of that lieutenant, later to become the historical Captain Cook, 3 Navy ships, the London, Argonaut and the RFA Tidereach, attended the celebrations at Gisborne. Maori dancers performed a traditional ritual of greeting before the Governor-General and Captain Loseby of HMS London. And 12,000 miles away, on the rocky coastline of Cornwall near Helston, the Intensive Flying Trials Unit, 700S Squadron at HMS Seahawk, Culdrose, were putting the Westland Sea King helicopter through flying trials. In November, the squadron had 6 of the Mark I Sea King choppers, which at that time had flown over 450 hours and enabled a comprehensive operating and maintenance technique to be worked out in readiness for their service in frontline squadrons, where they'll operate in an anti-submarine role in 1970. A colourful occasion when the aircraft carrier Golden Eagle was listing heavily from the sheer weight of the gold braid of admirals, captains and commanders gathered on board for the presentation by Her Majesty the Queen of a colour to the Western Fleet. It was the first time such a ceremony had taken place on board ship, and it was the first colour to be received by the Western Fleet. The old colour was presented to the Home Fleet in 1937. A full gale had blown up at just the wrong moment, and plans to hold the ceremony on the flight deck had to be switched to the carrier's hangar. In spite of the weather, on the previous afternoon, while the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh visited the fleet submarine HMS Valiant, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne went on board the latest ocean-going survey ship, HMS Hecate, and Captain Osborne was delighted to welcome such a very popular visitor. At the same time, Prince Charles visited the frigate HMS Phoebe, and then the minehunter HMS Bilderston, which was alongside. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Allen, showed the Prince of Wales and Dr. David Owen, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Defence, Royal Navy, over the ship. The Prince also paid a short visit to HMS Glamorgan. Next day, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, on board the Royal Yacht Britannia, watched a steam past of the Western Fleet off Tor Bay. The Hawker Siddeley Harrier carried out the first ever deck landings in August. The fixed-wing VTOL jet aircraft, piloted by Mr. Hugh Merriweather, chief test pilot of the company, flew the close support fighter from Dunsfold Airfield in Surrey and made several successful landings on HMS Blake, cruising off the Isle of Wight. An ape's-eye view of the Wessex helicopters which carried the assault troops of 41 Commando from HMS Bulwark to the Rock of Gibraltar for exercise rock climb. A mock invasion of the fortress by a force of 750 Marines onto positions around the naval dockyard and the military sector on the south side of the rock. The defending forces anticipated the attack and established machine gun positions during the night. The 3 waves of helicopters suffered heavy casualties and many were shot out of the sky, in the war game that is. Landing craft met with stiff resistance too, as they attempted a landing in the dock area, and it took just 90 minutes for the attacking forces to be annihilated by the defenders. A tricky job off Jersey in August for a Navy diving team from Plymouth. During the 39-45 war, a German cargo ship carrying 50 1,000-pound aerial bombs sank near Noirmont Point. The task of lifting these bombs with flotation bags became even more risky when divers found that the fuses were in the bombs. On board an MFV, the team strapped plastic explosive packs to the corroded steel casings under the expert eye of Chief Petty Officer Tom King. 23 bombs were prepared for dispatch to oblivion, towed by Gemini to a safe distance and blown up by Lieutenant Commander Wilson's team. The remainder were disposed of early in 1970. In the Mediterranean, the Fleet Air Arms 892 Squadron, under its commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Brian Davis, embarked 4 Phantoms on the 83,000-ton United States aircraft carrier Saratoga. The British versions of the Phantom were exercising along with their opposite numbers on air defence missions. 1970 will see the squadron embarked in HMS Ark Royal. The 25th anniversary of the wartime action which liberated the island of Walcheren in the Scheldt estuary of Holland was honoured by the laying of a wreath by Queen Juliana and His Royal Highness Prince Bernhard at the Resistance Memorial in Middelburg. More than 500 old comrades returned to Walcheren for the celebrations, and for some, old acquaintance was not forgotten. On the 1st of November 1944, these bleak shores witnessed heavy casualties as the Royal Marines Commandos 41, 47 and 48, which formed the main seaborne strike force, gallantly manoeuvred the landing craft under heavy enemy fire and put the commandos ashore. Out of 26 craft, only 6 survived the 48 hours of bitter fighting before the German division surrendered. It was this successful operation which opened up the port of Antwerp for Allied shipping. HMS Revenge completes the quartet of nuclear-powered Polaris submarines for the Royal Navy. She was commissioned in November at Camel Laird shipyard. Commander Basil Watson commands the starboard crew, and the port crew is commanded by Commander Ian Morrison. Formalities over, port and starboard crews celebrated the commissioning at Hume Hall, Port Sunlight, and in true naval style, spilt a few pints down the hatch. Doing a jig around the capstan is child's play to the jack tars of the 20th century. Today's bell-bottoms practice much greater feats of balance. Although the feats were nowhere near as attractive to watch as those of Iba Ruber-Steyer, 1969 winner of the Miss World contest. The blonde model from Austria went down to the Thames at Westminster and met the lads of HMS President from Whitehall Wireless, who were on board the Discovery, improving communications. The human kind, that is. For the next exciting 12 months, it'll be full ahead for Miss Ruber-Steyer as she travels the world promoting various enterprises. But glamour is not everything, though the Royal Navy of the 70s possesses its full share. Britain still has worldwide interests, and the Royal Navy will continue to defend them from the waters nearer home.